Alright, we're going to show you guys how to fix a patch. Someone punched a hole in my wall. It's pretty much the same technique for a 1-inch patch to a 3-foot patch. It's the same technique. So usually we take a straight piece, either level or a piece of wood. I like to do the outline of it. See where I'm at, make it nice and square. Another technique is you already cut the piece of drywall that's for the size and you can put it up against it. And then you can do the same thing with a pencil. Outline, outline, outline. And I like to mark so I know the top piece of the drywall beats the top of that, just in case your patch isn't square. So the next step is you gotta cut it out. We used to use drywall, or you can use a keyhole saw. I like to use just a regular razor blade, and you just basically score the line. Just score it 1 or 2 times, go down, score the side, do it again, do it again, do it again. Once you get it scored nicely, nice and deep, the patch will come right out. Give you a nice square cutout. Get all that old broken stuff out of there. Clean up the edges a little bit. Most people think you have to cut out from stud to stud so you have something to screw to. That's not the case. What we usually do is we use some 1x2s or 2x2s or even a 2x4. So you just get pieces like this and cut them a little bigger than the patch size. What I like to do is we use regular drywall screws for 1/2-inch drywall, so 1.25 inch, 1.5 screws. And then you just get the screws ready to go. And then you put the patch in there and you get it halfway through. This is just basically backing. I like to get at least 2 screws in there, 2 or 3 in the old sheetrock. And I like to get a piece of wood on both sides. Sometimes 1 piece of wood isn't enough. Sometimes you can go diagonal if you only have 1 piece of wood, but if you have enough lumber, then we like to do at least 2. I think some guys, they'll do 4 pieces, but I think that's going overboard. Maybe if the patch is over 3 foot, maybe you want to do all 4 sides. But with the 2 screws in it, then it's good to go. Now I got my patch. I don't remember which way it was, but good thing I made that pencil mark to go right there. The patch is kind of loose, so I just shave off or use a rasp, take some off, and go there. This patch is not tight, but that's fine because I'm going to be using a quick set materials and a fiberglass. So once we get the patch in place, I like to screw it in. And it helps if you actually get the screw in the stud. Same thing here, you want to get 1, 2 screws on each side, that way the patch is nice and secure because we don't want it to come out and re-crack out. 2 screws, 2 screws. There we go, we just hung our patch, so we no longer need our hanging tools. I always keep a bucket with my hanging tools. A lot of guys wear a big hanging belt, but I don't need all that just to do a simple patch job. Once we're about ready to do the tape, I just like to always scrape it to take the rough edges off. And sometimes when there's a gap like that, you can mix some quick set mud and pre-fill it, or you could just put the tape on it. I use a fiberglass tape. I put it on each side. This fiberglass will keep it from cracking, A nice easy patch. That should be good enough. I like to press it down so I know it's secure. If you want to even double it up, do a nice diagonal piece each direction. That'll even make it even better and stronger. The next step is we just mix some 5-minute. This is the 5-minute I like to use. It's a quick set 5-minute mud. It's perfect for patch jobs like this. I always use a 12-inch knife. Some guys like to use a 10-inch knife, 8-inch knife, but I always stick to my 12-inch knife. You always want to have fresh water, and then I keep my 5-minute in a separate bucket so it's always sealed up and kept away from water. In a patch like this, we don't need that much material, so I'll just mix a little bit. Just enough water in it, maybe a sponge full, and you mix it up, mix up the materials. If I put too much water in there, that's okay. I can dump some out, just to what I need. We're not making pancake batter, we're trying to make bread dough, because it's like a first coat mud. I like to scrape the sides, get all the dry powder mixed in there, so we don't want to waste any materials. Once I get that coated, that's nice, thick coat, I have enough mud here to do the patch. Notice it doesn't fall off the knife. It's nice heavy mud, almost like a thick blizzard. So then we go through like this. Since there's a gap, I like to push down the material so I know it gets inside that gap. So now it's nice and sealed. And the next step is we just do a nice heavy first coat. Nice heavy first coat. Nice heavy first coat. Same thing like coating the joints. You just feather the sides, top and bottom. Nice heavy first coat. It doesn't have to be perfect on the first coat. It's just a nice fill. This is a 5-minute, so I like to get rid of the old materials. I usually keep a trash bag or an old box of mud here. And we always like to keep the bucket on the lid on the bucket so we don't get water in there when we wash up. Then you go through and wash up your tools. And by the time you're done washing up your pan and knife, the mud will have set up. It's a 5-minute mud. Sometimes it sets up in 3 minutes, sometimes 8 minutes. So you just got to be right on it. So by the time you get everything washed up and you get ready for the next, set yourself up for the next step. I got everything cleaned up, so then I want to check my mud. It's still wet to the touch, so we just wait. Hurry up and wait right now. Alright, our first coat on our patch is starting to set up. It's still damp, but you can work with it. So I get a fresh sponge out of my water bucket, make sure it's just damp, and I take the edges of the patch and I feather those in with a damp sponge. And I like to go through the patch and just go over it. Then I take my 6-inch knife and I feather it, feather it, feather it, feather it. You can go each way, up, down, side to side, whatever it takes, because all you're doing is you're pushing the mud down and you're taking off the excess mud. Once that's slicked out like that, wet sanded, slicked out, same process. I'm gonna mix some second coat mud. Same thing with some 5-mint mud. I only need a scoop for one patch, little scoop. Add my water, 3/4 of a sponge, and mix up my materials. Mix it, mix it, mix it. Second coat doesn't have to be really thick, but it has to be about like a really thick pancake batter. Because the patch is really coated already, so this is just a final step to make the patch nice and slicked out and clean and perfect. So we just take it, same thing like we did first coat. I like to go a little further out than the original first coat. And then this time we push down a lot harder. And then you just let that dry. Same thing, you want to clean up the 5-mint out of your tools before it dries in your tools. Get it all washed out, and then by the time you get everything cleaned up, you'll be ready to slick out and get ready for texture. All right, our second coat on our patch is starting to set up. It's still damp, so we can work with it. It's been about 4 or 5 minutes. Same thing like the first coat. You want to take a damp sponge, hit your edges. So basically that feathers them out so you don't have a sharp edge. Same thing, I like to get it damp. Make sure your 6-inch knife's clean, and same thing, you just go through and you take off the excess mud. It's kind of like a wet sanding technique, or like you're working with clay almost. You go through and slick it out, slick it out. Perfect. If I left it like that and I primered and painted it, it'll be a perfect smooth patch, but we're not gonna just leave it smooth. We gotta match the texture. Same thing with the texture, I already have some mixed in a bucket. I always like to remix it to make sure it's a nice creamy texture. Consistency of most textures, it barely goes through the beater. It's not super heavy, it's not super thin. With the skip trowel texture or Santa Fe, you can do bigger knives, but let's just do it with a simple 6-inch knife because people that don't use knives every day, they don't have knife control. So 6-inch knife is easier to control. So we just get a little bit of mud, make sure it's nice and clean, our 6, and then a basic skip trowel. The same thing like we did on the other videos. We go through and we do a skip trowel. Skip trowel, skip trowel, skip trowel. Say I don't like my skip trowel, well let's start over. I don't like what I just did there. Just by slicking this out, I just added another coat over the patch, so it's even gonna make it even better. Let's start over. Skip trowel. This time I don't want skip trowel, I want Santa Fe. Well, I can just put a little bit more skip trowel on it and press down with a little more pressure and push down harder. Now we got a Santa Fe. Well, I don't like these textures at all. I want it just smooth. Well, let's just slick it out. Take off all that materials. Now you got a nice skim coat. So it'll be a nice skim coat texture. Say, nah, I don't like a skim coat. Let's go back. I want to skip trowel it again. Skip trowel. That skip trowel's too light. I want it heavier. So you just do a double skip. Double skip. Double skip. Then knocking it down, we always knock down skip trowels, you just lightly go over it. That just knocks over the ridges. And that's a nice skip trowel right there over my patch. So with this regular mud is different from the first coat and second coat mud. This is a regular joint compound. It has to dry overnight. So we can reuse this mud. What we don't use, we save in our bucket. And we cap off our bucket and we save it for the next job, for the next time we need mud. I just put a little bit of water on the top so it doesn't dry out. Put my lid on it and the mud's good for a long time. And now we're pretty much done with this job and we can collect our money. And I usually tell the homeowners, you take a sanding block like this, you let the patch dry for at least 24 hours, a piece of sandpaper, 150 grit or sanding block, and then next day you just lightly sand it. A little more effort on the edges and just glide over it. You're not grinding down Bondo or nothing, you're just giving it a quick swipe just to knock the burrs out of the texture. And then once you sand it, you do a drywall primer, a PVA drywall sealer or a Kills, and then you paint. And then there you go.